Let's get started. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 88 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We recognize that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Pursuant to Standing Order to the House of Order reference adopted on June 21st and pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 26th, the committee is meeting to proceed with the clause-by-clause of the Bill C-53, an act respecting the recognition of certain Métis governments in Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. And we're going to get right into it. We had last week or on Tuesday a start, and so we're going to pick up right where we left off. I just need to find my sheet to see where we left off.
Yep, right here.
Okay, resuming debate. We're on new clause 2.1 with MP Schmal's sub-amendment to CPC 1.1. And now my speaking list. Do you have my speaking list? Yeah, we have the sub-amendment.
Yeah.
And the floor was with Mr. Viersen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. We were just discussing around the word individual, Métis individuals, whether we should have clarified in this bill whether they should have the ability to choose to be represented by in Alberta the MNA or no organization at all. This, again, a number of people have contacted me since the last meeting as well, pointing this out, that you may be a Métis person wanting to exercise Métis rights, but may not want to be represented by any of the three organizations that are referenced in the schedule. And so that was where our discussion had left off in the last meeting. My colleague Jamie Schmal had put forward an amendment to amend it from Métis peoples, because as Ms. Idlout had pointed out that the officials as well had pointed out that Métis peoples meant more in a collective, and that was not actually what I was trying to achieve with this amendment as well. And so we are now at the point where we need to have a discussion around does the term individuals mean, how would that fit into this bill? Now, I also managed to find on the M&A website the agreement, the 2018 agreement that had been come to, and I did confirm that was indeed the case, where they said folks that are part of the Métis settlements of Alberta may become members of the M&A, but that still doesn't clarify if individuals not living on the Métis settlements, not part of the Métis settlements, that don't want to become members of the M&A, can they exercise their rights as Métis people or Métis individuals across the province or across the country? And so that's what my amendment would do, would ensure that, and that's different than what Jaime was talking about with NDP 4, which was coming. So I hope, Mr. Chair, that we would be able to pass my amendment, the sub-amendment, and then my amendment to ensure that Métis individuals, regardless of where they live in the country, are able to exercise their rights as Métis people, regardless of who is representing them. So those are my comments.
Thank you. I have Mr. Vidal next on my list. I don't see him, so I'm ready to call the question. Will all those sub-amendments CPC 1 carry? So we have the sub-amendment. We're voting on it, so all in favor? Yes. Okay, do you want a recorded vote? Okay, recorded vote, please.
All right. Mr. Batiste.
Voting against.
Mr. Carr. Ms. Gainey. Mr. McLeod.
Against.
Ms. Atwin.
Against.
Mr. Schmal. Mr. Vidal. Mr. Viersen.
For.
Mr. Zimmer.
In favor.
Madame Gill,
Contre.
Ms. Idlout,
Akapunga against.
Okay, the sub-amendment does not carry. Now we'll move to the speaking list for the amendment. I have nobody, so I'm ready to call the question. Shall CPC 1.1 carry?
Against?
Okay, do you want a recorded vote? Okay,
Mr. Carr, Ms. Gainey, Mr. McLeod,
Against.
Ms. Atwin,
Against?
Mr. Schmale,
Yes.
4, yes.
Mr. Vidal,
Yes.
Mr. Viersen,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer, Madame Gill,
Désolée, j'ai de la difficulté avec mon.
I'm having trouble with my mute. No.
Akapunga against.
seven nays, 4 yeas.
okay, we'll now move to Clause 3. For Clause 3, I have under Clause 3 CPC 1.2.
Schmale?
And I'm going to share a ruling from the chair. Oh, does anyone want to move CPC 1.2?
Chair, I'd like to move another issue that we have. I believe we can do that now, is my understanding.
Are you on a point of order, or are you moving CPC 1.2? I've asked for.
I guess on a point of order to raise the issue, raise the motion that we tabled on
You
Friday.
can't raise a motion on a point of order. So
Well,
I am asking if anybody
that's
wants
why my
to.
original was no, but because I said, now that I had the floor in between clauses, before you got to that.
Well, no, I already called CPC 1.2 and asked if somebody wants to move it. So if somebody wants to move CPC 1.2, you'll then have the floor.
Is that yours, Arnold?
All right. Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll move CPC 1.2.
Okay.
This is an amendment that we heard from a number of witnesses along the way that would put clarity into this bill, ensuring that any treaty does not deal with any matter relating to land. This has been this was something that we heard over and over again, and we also heard from the minister assuring us that the bill that did not deal with any land. And so I think for the clarity of all involved, we should have ensure that we put that in the bill just to allow that for that clarity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to provide a ruling from the chair based on advice from our expert team here. So Bill C-53 provides a framework for the implementation of treaties between Canada and the Métis governments listed in the schedule. The amendment seeks to identify an element that cannot be contained in a future treaty. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, states on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. In the opinion of the chair, the amendment introduces a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill. Therefore, I rule this amendment inadmissible. Mr. Viersen.
Could I challenge that?
Yeah,
Really?
you can challenge the chair's ruling.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd like to do that.
Okay, so then we'll vote to whether to sustain the chair's ruling or not. So I'm ruling that it's out of order, and so a sustain means that that ruling of making it inadmissible stands, and a vote against to not sustain the chair means that it would stay. So recorded vote. Okay, recorded vote, please.
Mr. Batiste,
We agree with the chair. Sustained.
Mr. Carr,
Sustained.
Ms. Gainey,
Sustained.
Mr. McLeod, Ms. Atwin,
Sustained?
Mr. Schmale,
Against.
Mr. Vidal,
Against.
Mr. Viersen,
Against.
Mr. Zimmer,
Against.
Madame Gill,
Pour.
4.
Madame Idlout,
Sustain.
Okay. That's
7 yeas,
so then we just
4
moved.
nays.
Okay. Okay, so that is not, the decision is sustained, so CPC 1.2 is not allowed. We'll move to clause 3. I've already called,
I think you're doing that on purpose.
well, you know what, I'm
I
calling
think you're
clause
doing
3.
that on purpose, Chair.
We have a legislation to get through. And,
That's fine. You could have also brought it in April when you had a chance, the government.
yeah, and we're here now, and I know
Right.
you will have a chance to get to the floor. You have lots of things. Right now, the question I was putting is, shall clause 3 carry? Recorded vote? No, this is clause 3. Shall clause 3 carry?
We just voted on that. You just ruled on that.
Oh, sorry, yeah, it was, oh, I ruled on CPC 1.2. So CPC 1.2 is out, but we still have clause 3. So clause 3, as was originally in the bill, is the one that's being called. Yeah, so clause, without the amendment, yes, as originally stated. Yeah, so recorded vote.
Mr. Batiste?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
In favor?
Ms. Gainey? Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Ms. Atwin? In favor? Mr. Schmale?
I am voting.
Mr. Vidal?
In favor?
Mr. Viersen?
In favor?
Mr. Zimmer?
In favor.
Madame Gill?
Pour.
Ms. Idlout?
Punga in favor.
11 yeas.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I could?
I'm moving through this. There will be a chance for the...
I think I got in before you called the next clause there.
Are you raising a point of order?
No, I'm raising the motion that we tabled on Friday to be discussed right now. I'd like to discuss that motion quickly, if I could.
Okay, I'm not recognizing you at this point. Why? Because there's not a point of order. We have committee business that we're working on.
And I caught you, we did the motion, we tabled it on Friday as per the rules.
Right.
We gave proper notice. We caught you between clauses. We're raising this to quickly talk about a motion that is of an extreme importance. So I'd like to do that now, please.
He can technically do that.
And please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So as happened on Friday, I'll just quickly read the notice of the motion. The Standing Committee on Indigenous Northern Affairs report to the House that it, A, recognizes that the Chiefs of Ontario and the Attawapiskat First Nation are taking the federal government to courts over the carbon tax. B, recognizes the statement of the Chiefs of Ontario said the carbon tax is discriminatory and anti-reconciliatory and has a disproportionate impact on First Nations. C, recognizes that the Liberal government refused to negotiate with First Nations in Ontario and refused to enter into good faith conversations, according to the Chiefs of Ontario. And D, of course, agrees with the Chiefs of Ontario that First Nations should be exempt from the carbon tax. Now, I'd like to quickly speak with this very quickly. For the committee to contemplate this important motion, I think it's important that we do what the Liberals were not prepared to do, which is listen to the voices of the Chiefs of Ontario. In a press release dated November 30th, 2023, the Chiefs of Ontario released the following statement regarding a judicial review it has filed on the Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Pricing Act. Quote, Chiefs of Ontario and Attawapiskat First Nation have filed a judicial review today after Canada refused to negotiate with First Nations in Ontario to alleviate the discriminatory and anti-reconciliatory application to the Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Act on First Nations. The Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Act established Canada's carbon pricing regime, which, although designed to be revenue neutral, has a disproportionate impact on First Nations and their members. First Nations see the reality of climate change every single day and expect Canada to address it. However, we, or they, do not accept a regime that creates new burdens on First Nations, which already are face deep in infrastructure and economic challenges. Canada should be working with us to confront the climate crisis and close gaps on reserve instead of creating policy in an ivory tower that exacerbates the affordability issues our citizens face. And that was said by Grand Chief Abram Benedict, He holds the environment portfolio at Chiefs of Ontario. He's also the Grand Chief of Akwesasne. So, the Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Act was intended to effect change using price signals, moving consumers away from greenhouse gas emitting fuels. First Nations face significant infrastructure and economic gaps, making it difficult to transition to less carbon-intensive alternatives. First Nations, who already have higher poverty rates than the rest of Canada's population, are therefore forced to absorb these extra costs. I'll go on to another quote. The charge is not supposed to generate revenue for Canada, but when it's applied to us, it does, said Chief Benedict. Going on with another quote. We don't get the rebates and returns that other communities get, and it's unfair. The Chiefs of Ontario was mandated by all First Nations in Ontario to negotiate an end to carbon pricing on First Nations in a resolution that First Nations across Ontario passed with full consensus. However, Canada has refused to enter into good faith conversations to resolve the harms caused by the carbon charge. The carbon charge has applied in Ontario since 2019. Producers, distributors, and importers pay the charge to the federal government and then pass on the charge by way of higher prices to consumers. The GGPPA is designed to be revenue neutral, with the money going back to the province of origin. Individuals and households receive 90% of collected charges back through the Climate Action Incentive payment, which is not readily available to First Nations, and 10% is returned through federal programs. Though through these rebates, most households get allege they get back more than they pay. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed that is not true. However, it's also not true for the case of First Nations. The federal government has pledged to return 0.7% of the total charge proceeds from Ontario to First Nations communities in Ontario. This amount is insufficient given the increased costs of the charge on First Nations and their members. I could go on, Chair. There is lots more to say on this issue, but we do see there is significant importance to have this motion voted on and a conversation about it, and get an idea of where the committee is, and hopefully they're in a position where they're willing to study this further and talk about the hardships being put on First Nations by this government. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schmel. I have Mr. Viersen next on my list.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think that we need to study this for sure. The reality is that folks, First Nations living in northern Alberta and northern Ontario are not of those quote-unquote families that receive more back than they pay. In fact, disproportionately, it is northern remote communities that pay the detriment or come under the detriment of the carbon tax. First of all, it's colder. Paying the carbon tax on the natural gas to heat all of the First Nation buildings on reserve. They have to pay the carbon tax on that the same as everywhere else. And in many cases, the carbon tax is more than the actual energy costs on the natural gas bill. Propane, same story. On the propane, you end up with I have my own bill, but also I know that people send me their bills and show me them often, saying, hey, the actual energy cost is less than what the carbon taxes cost. So that means that like 50% of the cost of heating the building is carbon tax. Then the diesel fuel. Many of these communities are generating their power off of diesel fuel, and when they're paying for that diesel fuel, again, that carbon tax is being placed on there, making it more and more expensive to do. And this is a ratcheting up. There's a ratcheting up effect that happens with this, is because it takes energy to do everything, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're traveling, whether you're...
Que l'on voyage, que l'on chauffe chez soi, que l'on fasse la transformation de quelque chose, il faut de l'énergie. Et en cours de route, eh bien, il y a toujours cette taxe sur le carbone qui ne fait qu'alourdir le coût de façon incessante. Et c'est un petit peu comme la TPS, mais donc c'est pas comme une taxe qui permet, comme la TPS, de recevoir l'argent et puis ensuite d'obtenir une ristourne. Non, la taxe sur le carbone, c'est quelque chose qui est facturé et qui vient s'ajouter au prix, et donc de façon réelle. Et lorsqu'on veut revendre un produit, par exemple, qui a été alourdi, eh bien, il y a une augmentation qui se répercute, et cela est un facteur d'augmentation continuelle des prix. Monsieur Viersen?
There's no interpretation.
One moment, we will check.
The interpreter apologizes for using the wrong channel.
Mr. Gerson, please continue.
Where was I at, Mr. Speaker?
I think just concluding.
No. Supply chain. We were talking about the supply chain and the ratcheting up effect that the carbon tax has on the price of products. And now, Mr. Zimmer here, I think just in question period, was pointing out the can of Campbell's soup was something like $11 in Nunavut. In Nunavut. Why is that? Well, because somebody has to get that can of Campbell's soup to Nunavut. What does it take? What does it take? Cream of mushroom. What does it take to get a can of cream of mushroom to Iqaluit? It takes a boat ride or a plane ride to get it there. Or I imagine you could, if you wanted to, drive over the ice at certain times of the year. So a plane ride most of the time. What does that take? Energy. And we put a carbon tax on that energy. So you can see just in that can of Campbell's soup going to Iqaluit that the carbon tax is making life more expensive for everyone. It doesn't matter if it's food, it doesn't matter whether it's hygiene products, it doesn't matter whether it's whatever you're getting. There is an energy component to that product, and as the carbon tax is added along the way, every single piece of the supply chain is having the carbon tax added. That makes life more expensive, and so we've seen now that the government has blinked. They've acknowledged that their carbon tax does make life more expensive, untenable for Canadians, particularly in Atlantic Canada. I would note that when the Prime Minister was announcing his pause on home heating oil carbon tax, that it was only Atlantic Canadian MPs that were standing behind him during that announcement. It wasn't. Yeah, you can confirm that too, eh? That there was only Atlantic Canadian. Hammy might have been one of the people standing behind him during that announcement, because this was just a purely crass political calculation. Then after the fact, when they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, then they said, well, then there was this. They said, oh, this supply is clear across the country. This isn't just for Atlantic Canadians, for Canadians everywhere across the country that are on home heating oil. And so that has now caused a domino effect of organizations and populations and provinces across the country saying, like, well, if one part of the country can get the carbon tax removed on their home heating, why isn't this good for all of Canadians? And the First Nation communities are having to come cap in hand to the federal government to raise funds to continue to get their communities to operate, only to have to pay the carbon tax to heat their buildings. And so they've put forward a number of initiatives now to question the federal government as to why that is. And I think it would be entirely appropriate for our committee here to hear from some of these community leaders and communities as to the effects of the carbon tax on their communities, and what percentage of their budget does the carbon tax consume. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Next on my list, I have Mr. Batiste.
I motion to adjourn debate so that we can get back to legislation.
Okay, so we'll call the question on that. So all in favor of adjourning debate? And all those opposed?
They want a
Oh, recorded vote?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do a recorded vote.
Mr. Batiste,
In favor of adjourning debate.
Ms. Atwin,
In favor?
Mr. Carr,
In favor.
Ms. Gainey. In favor. Mr. McLeod,
Yes. In favor.
Mr. Schmale,
No.
Mr. Vidal,
No.
Mr. Viersen,
No.
Mr. Zimmer,
Opposed.
Madame Gill,
En faveur.
Ms. Idlout.
Pangapunga in favor.
Motion adjourned.
Okay, so that is adjourned. We'll move back to the bill before us. We were left off at new clause 3.1 with NDP 2 being next up. Would the member like to move NDP 2?
Yes.
Give it, Ms. Idlout, do you want to move it?
Do I have to read it, or
Yeah, you can just indicate you want to move it.
I move to add 3.1?
And
As
NDP
submitted?
2, yes, at 3 point, new clause 3.1.
Sorry. Can I pretend like I said it like you did?
Ms. Idlout moves NDP 2. With that, I just want to point out to our colleagues, everyone at the table, that once moved, if NDP is moved, CPC 1.3 cannot be moved as they are identical. So the question is, shall NDP 2 carry? Recorded vote?
No, could I discuss it?
I just called the question.
All right.
So. Okay, recorded vote. Can we do a recorded vote?
Recorded vote. Mr. Batiste,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Ms. Gainey, Mr. McLeod,
Yes.
Ms. Atwin,
I don't think there's any wording difference.
Mr. Schmale,
It's identically the same to yours.
It's the same. I vote in favor.
Mr. Vidal,
In favor.
Mr. Viersen,
Opposed.
Mr. Zimmer,
In favor.
Madame Gill,
En faveur.
Ms. Idlout. In favor, one opposed.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move past CPC 1.3, which I indicated is no longer in play. So then we go to the question of if NDP 2.1, if the member would like to move NDP 2.1.
Yes, I would like to move NDP 2.1.
Okay, now on this one, there is a ruling that I'd like to share with the committee. Bill C-53 seeks to advance the recognition of the right to self-determination, including the inherent right of self-government recognized and affirmed by Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 of certain Métis collectivities and the recognition of the authority of Métis governments to act on behalf of those collectivities. The amendment seeks to clarify that nothing in this act is to be construed as recognizing any right or claim of any Métis collectivity that is represented by a Métis government set out in column 1 of the schedule. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. It is the opinion of the chair, since Bill C-53 seeks to recognize the right to self-determination of certain Métis collectivities, the amendment is contrary to the principle of the bill. Therefore, the amendment is inadmissible. So that's the ruling of the chair on NDP 2.1. Mr. Viersen.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'd like to challenge that ruling.
Okay. So we will then go to a vote to sustain the chair.
Do you think we get an explanation?
Can they explain to us why? Is that, just procedurally?
Procedure that I'm being informed, it's straight to the vote.
So we can't get an explanation as to why?
Well, I
you're
have
like-
explained what I just read, that in short, it is beyond the scope of the bill past second reading, and so that's where we have exceeded the. Yeah, so that we're beyond it. Where was it? The C-53 seeks to recognize the right to self-determination of certain Métis collectivities, but this amendment is contrary because it would recognize any right or claim of any Métis collectivity that is represented by a Métis government set out in column 1 of the schedule. So that's where it exceeds. So with that, there's no debate allowed. Once we get into it, that's the explanation. And so we'll call the recorded vote with our clerk leading that.
Sustain.
Yeah, and the call is to sustain the chair's ruling that NDP 2.1 is inadmissible.
Mr. Batiste?
Sustained.
Mr. Carr?
Sustained.
Ms. Gainey? Mr. McLeod?
Sustained.
Ms. Atwin?
Sustained.
Mr. Schmale?
Against.
Mr. Vidal?
No.
Mr. Viersen?
No.
Mr. Zimmer?
What's that?
No.
Mr.
No,
Zimmer?
sorry.
Madame Gill?
En faveur.
Ms. Idlout?
Against.
6 to 5.
Okay, and sustaining?
It's sustained.
Okay, the chair's ruling is sustained, which leads us to clause 4. And first up, we have CPC 1.4. Would the member for CPC 1.4 like to move this amendment?
Mr. Chair, do we not have to approve 3.1 first? Before we move to clause 4, is there not a 3.1? I thought there was a 3.1. No, as in the one that we passed that I didn't like, that I voted against. I was the only one that voted against it.
With
We voted on the amendment, but did we vote on the approval of it?
we with NDP 2.
We added a whole new clause now, essentially. So we need to vote to approve that clause, as
I'll
far as I know.
Turn to my experts for an explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is the usual process for the clause already contained in the bill. However, when an amendment seeks to create a new clause, for example, in this case, new clause 3.1, by adopting NDP 2, that new clause is automatically created. So you don't have to vote on it. By adopting NDP 2, that new clause is automatically adopted, created.
Thank you. I was going to get to that. So I'm now asking if CPC 1.4, if the member wants to move this one.
You bet, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Viersen, the floor is yours.
This amendment would replace line 8 on page 3 with basically all it does is it changes the word collectives to communities, and then in line 10 changes collectives again to communities. I think this goes back to this thing that we were talking about before, making sure that we and there may be more of a discussion that we need to have on this. We did touch on this the other day when we were talking about peoples, communities, collectivities, individuals. I just think that the communities is kind of more well represented. Now, in talking with my colleagues over the last few days, there is one of the challenges that this bill, by the government, by putting together 3 or maybe more different groups into one bill, we end up with these situations where we are struggling to define or different parts of the country communicate on these issues differently. And so some want communities, some want collectives, some want peoples. And so those 3 terms do make a difference. Now, I heard from Cadott Lake, the ones from up by Fort McMurray, that even the folks down from Lethbridge, they talk extensively around communities. And then we haven't heard a lot from the folks from Saskatchewan, but they they are quite adamant about the word collective. And I don't even, we didn't get into it too much with the folks from Ontario, but the point being is that there is a lot of differentiating around that word. And so I put forward a series of amendments to change the word collective to communities, and I think that is communities is more reflective of how, particularly in Alberta anyways, that's how the Métis organize themselves and the word that they use. And I would hope that we can align this bill with that. So those are my comments, and I hope that this motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Viersen. All right, well, we'll call the vote on CPC 1.4. So shall CPC 1.4 carry?
Mr. Batiste?
No.
Mr. Carr?
No.
Ms. Gainey? Mr. McLeod?
Opposed, no.
Madame Atwin?
Against.
Mr. Schmale?
I vote
Yay.
Mr. Vidal?
I abstain.
Mr. Viersen?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer?
Yes.
Madame Gill?
Contre.
Ms. Idlout?
Against.
7 nays.
Okay, that does not carry. We'll then call Clause 4 as originally proposed and recorded division, or recorded vote, please. So Clause 4?
Clause 4. Mr. Batiste?
In favor.
Mr. Carr?
In favor.
Ms. Gainey? Mr. McLeod?
CPC 2 is next, Jamie. Which is
Mr.
yours?
I'm sorry, Madame Atwin?
In favor.
CPC 2.
Mr. Schmale?
is clause 4.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. I vote in favor.
Mr. Vidal?
Yes.
Mr. Viersen?
Clause 4, no.
Mr. Zimmer?
Yes.
Madame Gill?
Oui.
Ms. Idlout?
Before I share my vote, I just have a quick question because I have a later amendment on this. Are we going to vote on that amendment?
We are in the middle of a vote. Yeah, if it's NDP 4.1, it's a different clause, so
Okay.
they'd be separate, yeah.
Amendment on the current
Yeah.
clause or a different clause?
Well, we're, a different clause.
Ms. Idlout?
Against.
7 and 2.
So clause 4 carries. Then we have a new clause 4.1 that would be created by CPC 2. Would Mr. Schmale like to move CPC 2?
Yeah, I would if I can quickly just chat to this. I think this clause comes out of the testimony we heard as we discussed this bill, especially around some of the concerns of what happens next, and you know, should this bill pass in its current form, it doesn't give a final look, and when I say that, I mean Parliament. And I think that's where some of the concerns we heard, especially from the Ontario Chiefs, were around that next stage. What does it mean? What happens? And so if it's an order in council, or it could be an order in council, there isn't that final look. And I think this lays out some of the protections that were being asked for, and that's probably not the right word to use, but just more addressing the concerns, because you know, in the opposition, it's our job to hold the government to account, and giving an order in council kind of full reign, a wide swath, to agree to terms that might not be open to scrutiny, I think is something this motion talks to, and the fact that it hopefully will, as I said at the beginning, address some of the concerns that we heard right off the top with the Ontario chiefs. So.
You wanting to speak? Okay. Next on my speaking list, I have Mr. Viersen and Mr. Vidal. Are you wanting to get on the speaking list too? Okay, so Mr. Vidal.
Yeah, so this amendment, just to,
Oh, I thought you guys were.
Mr. Viersen, you have the floor.
yeah, just around this motion or amendment would allow Parliament to be a little bit more involved in the process. Are we? Sorry. You're supportive of our. Well, that's good. Well, I'm just want to make sure that you know what you're voting on here. So the challenge that we have, and again with some of these things, is that Parliament is somewhat outside of the process. So like we have a deal that was signed back in 2018 with a number of folks around the country, of which Parliament was unaware that these agreements were being signed. And so this amendment would allow for, in the similar way that when we sign trade agreements around the world, that they would be brought to Parliament to be scrutinized, that Parliament would be involved in the process, that Parliament would have an ability to study these treaties, and as the prerogative of the government is to enter into agreements and treaties, it is the Parliament that then holds the government to account on many of these things, and it's challenging for the Parliament or for the legislators to hold the government to account on these things if they have no idea that they're going on. And so that is hopefully that we can have greater clarity and prevent surprises that happen. The other thing that we heard over and over again from folks that came before our committee is that they were unaware that this was going on. They were not consulted. They were saying, "Hey, the government's entering into new agreements with folks that live in our area," and we had no idea that this was happening. And this amendment wouldn't address that in its entirety, but it would be another level of notifying folks that, hey, something's going on, something's happening. The government is talking with folks in your area when this, and it would allow for a level of scrutiny that we heard from a number of people from across the country who were concerned that there was no scrutiny, there was no consultation. This is the folks who come here repeatedly saying that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People say that they have a duty to consult. They have a free and prior and informed consent. That includes discussions around rights recognition in areas that already have folks with particular rights recognition, and how does that interplay? So we need to ensure that we have Parliament being notified about agreements that are being entered into. We have to ensure that we don't have surprises like we've had in the past. Mr. Chair, I would suggest that maybe even perhaps when governments begin these kind of exercises, that they maybe have to gazette it. They have to put it in the Canada Gazette to ensure that then like kind of tips off the world that, hey, Canada is pursuing agreements with particular entities and groups across the country, and that would lay out reasons, or lay out or allow for other groups to know that this is happening, and if they have things to say about it, they can approach their elected official and say, we have concerns. We are worried about this. We want to know what's going on. When there are groups that are here that say, hey, we had no idea these discussions were even going on, we should have the government, if they're having these discussions. It's not like these are Canadians. These are Canadians they're all Canadians that we're having this discussion with. It's not like there's some strategic advantage. It's not some national security concerns that we would say, oh, we have to not have these discussions out in the open. This is the reason why we need to have these discussions out in the open about what is rights recognition happening. What discussions is the government having? Who is the government having these discussions with? Are all of the parties that are at that table, should they all be at the table? We have other bills. We've got bills in front of Parliament right now which are doing that exact thing, building consultation tables, right? And then Parliament gets to have a discussion about who are appropriate people to sit at that table. We get to have that discussion, and all of that happens beforehand. And this particular amendment would ensure that Parliament's at least tipped off that this is happening. Now, I think this is perhaps just more of a Band-Aid fix, because by the time a treaty, a copy of a treaty is entered into, that entered into language that is here, it's probably already a thing, right? You're not going to be able to necessarily turn that back. It's much more like a trade deal that we sign, is that once it's signed, it's signed. Sometimes it has to be ratified. Sometimes there's a clause in there saying it has to be ratified by the Parliament. And so if that was in the treaty, we would be able to ratify that. It wouldn't come into force, or it wouldn't be completely entered into until it was ratified by the Parliament. But if it didn't, maybe this is too late. And I don't think that the bill, like this bill, is very much just dealing with the agreement that was signed between the government and Métis people across the country already. And so that's what this bill is. But I think just more broadly, the government should be ensuring that Parliament knows what they're up to, and that's our job to figure out what they're up to some degree, and maybe there's some, but also that, like, I remember 2015, this government showed up here and they said that they were going to be open by default. Open by default, and I don't think that this was open by default. We heard from a number of organizations that I'm feeling I don't think that this was I don't think that this bill, we got to this bill because the government was open by default. This was done, these were secret negotiations that were done, and that folks showed up to our committee to express to us that they had not felt like they were duly consulted, would have been one thing, but even notified that these discussions were happening. And that is what we have to work to prevent. And so maybe after the fact, we're having a little bit of trouble to put that in this bill. And that, I guess that's what this amendment speaks to a little bit, is that we as parliamentarians, we would like to know, what's the government doing? Why are they, by the time we get a treaty entered into, that's what this bill is going to be doing. We're saying, okay, we anticipate a treaty, let's have that treaty come before Parliament quickly, because we want to see. I'm getting interrupted again.
I'd just like to remind all members that Mr. Viersen does have the floor now. So I'd
That's
like to
okay,
have some
that's
nice
okay.
orderly conduct within our committee so the staff can do their jobs. And so, Mr. Vierson, please continue.
I do appreciate it, Mr. Chair, because I do think that this is an important discussion to be had, and the things that they are bringing up allow me to address their concerns, obviously. And so I would say that having this treaty tabled and reference to this committee, much the way that we're doing this bill, it would be. But it would have been interesting to have that previous agreement that was signed. I read it over the last couple of evenings. I read the agreement with the M&A. It would have been interesting to have that agreement before our committee, kind of prior to its signing. So, as parliamentarians, we could scrutinize what is the government saying? What is the government doing on behalf of Canadians, on behalf of the Crown here? What are they saying? Are they abiding by generally accepted norms on these things? Have they considered all of the ramifications? It's obvious that the government has failed a lot in this bill, because we have a long list of folks that have showed up here being opposed to this. And so we are, and I would suggest perhaps that maybe the government should not have put the Alberta agreement, the Saskatchewan agreement, and the Ontario agreement all in one bill. Again, going back to my last amendment, collectives versus communities, the differences, the regional differences in this country are lead to these sorts of things. And so so that's what we want to ensure, is that the government is treating folks with respect and not trying to fit square pegs into round holes, which I sometimes feel that this particular bill is attempting to do. It's concerned around it's trying to do a one-size-fits-all, and it's trying to maybe make different Métis communities compete against each other. Maybe play off one Métis entity off against another, and also perhaps by putting all three of these groups into one bill, not allow for clarity around the verbiage that we use. So that's why we've moved this amendment, to ensure that when a treaty is signed into it, it doesn't happen in some backroom bunker here in Ottawa, but that it would be tabled in the House of Commons for the scrutiny of a committee, and to ensure that this is something that we can all get behind, and that we bring this country together rather than dividing this country, because that's this Prime Minister is really good at, is dividing this country. Rather than dividing the country, that bills like this would ensure that Canadians are united, that Canadians
Point of
can
order,
be
Mr.
proud
Chair.
of their country.
Sorry, Mr. Vierson.
I would just like
Go to
to
your point of
question the
order.
relevance of the last couple of minutes for Mr. Vierson, and I wish he could get back on track or perhaps move things along.
Okay, that's a fair point. I just encourage all members when they're speaking to remember that we are on new clause 4.1 CPC 2 amendment, and I would like to just take advantage of this brief interlude to point out, and I should have done this at the start, but if anyone's wondering, you might have noticed that CPC 2 and NDP 3 are identical, and because we're dealing with CPC 2, if CPC 2 is moved, NDP 3 cannot be moved, as they are identical. So that's, and then when we get to a vote, should CPC 2 carry, then we don't deal, NDP 3 is gone. So just wanted to clarify that. We'll go to a point of order to Ms. Idlut, and then we'll come back to Mr. Vierson, who has the floor.
I just wanted to very quickly clarify that I actually like the Conservatives' motion better, because they suggest more days. So when we are finally able to vote, I'll be voting in favor of this.
Okay, thanks. And Mr. Carr, okay, you're good. Okay, so Mr. Vierson, we'll go back to you, and I'll just ask you to keep it on point to the amendment that we're on.
Yeah.
And that would be just grand.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chair, for pointing that out. I was not I knew that us and the NDP had some similar ones, but I forgot that this one was the same. So I guess exactly, I'm just comparing it here. Jaime is saying it's exactly the same, but that I don't necessarily always take him at his word. So I'm going to make sure that I would just point out that in many cases, the NDP and Conservatives agree on a lot of the use of the words. I remember with the like free, prior, and informed consent, while the NDP were very supportive of that terminology and Conservatives were not as supportive of that terminology, we did both agree that those words meant what those words meant. Unlike the Liberals who kind of said, well, they're nice sounding words, but they don't necessarily mean what you think they are. So I'm happy to see that once again the Conservatives and NDP agree on the meaning of words. We generally mean what we say and say what we mean, and I do appreciate that about the NDP. And I can't say that that's the case for the Liberals all of the time. That said, I do think that I've made my case fairly compelling that the
Did he change your mind?
that we need to ensure that Parliament is in control of of this country, and that we want to ensure that Canadians that are being affected by legislation or affected by deals that the government that Parliament has a say in those deals, that Parliament understands what the government is doing, and that the Liberals would live up to their ideal of open by default. I think that's an honorable or ideal. I would say that government should strive for that, but I would say that that has not been my experience with the Liberal government, and this again shows, as we had multiple witnesses come here and say, hey, we did not know about this until the legislation dropped. That was so I think this would be an improvement on the bill, and I hope that I will see support from the Liberals on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Viersen. Next on my list is Mr. Vidal. Just want to reinforce, if people didn't hear over the disruptions, that Mr. Vidal is next on my list. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr.
He
Chair.
actually does have a good question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had my hand up before I saw that the Liberals are going to support the brilliant motion from my colleague, Mr. Schmale here, but in response to a number of concerns we heard from people. But I actually have one real quick question for officials. Just a clarification thing for me from an understanding perspective. And I think I know the answer, but I just want confirmation. In the February 23 agreements, it talks about the contemplated treaties that would be negotiated once this legislation was enacted. I think that's a clear understanding. The addition of this amendment, is it safe to assume that this would also apply to any future treaties that, we have these contemplated treaties, but what if 20 years from now there's another negotiation that falls under this legislation? Would this then apply to any future treaties, that it would have to come back through this process so Parliament has that final oversight on something way down the road someday? Does that question, hopefully that makes sense? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. In part, I'm familiar, there's another amendment regarding supplementary self-government agreements as well, which considers a similar process. So on the end, if both amendments were to go forward, that would certainly require both the future treaties, which we're proposing to give force and effect to through this legislation, and any supplementary agreement. I imagine we'll receive questions at that point later, and we can try to add more clarity. It is, however, typical that treaties include amendment provisions. The ability for those treaties to evolve via negotiations and order in council, an example being the Whitecap Treaty that was recently came before Parliament as well. And so the future treaties, absolutely. Supplementary self-government agreements we'll deal with at a separate stage, but it is typical that these treaties create space for amendment that doesn't require the parliamentary process.
So any, just for clarity, any outright new treaty would, but an amendment to an existing treaty which would be built into the initial treaty negotiation may not.
I think
that's what I
fair
heard,
to
correct?
say.
Yeah.
And you would see that amendment provision as part of the tabling with Parliament and the referral to
Of the
committee.
original treaty. Thank you. I think that added clarity.
Say that. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Don't turn off the mic.
While we're taking this pause, I was remiss in welcoming our officials back to the table today, so I'll take this this moment to welcome you back and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. Next, I have Mr. Viersen on my speaking list.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you again. And I'd love to welcome my my good colleague here, Mr. Melillo, to our committee as well. Just around the last meeting, I made a comment about the word Métis showing up in the Constitution of Canada, which caused a reaction in my colleague, Mr. Jaime, which I'm not quite exactly, or Mr. Batiste, Jaime Batiste, that guy, which caused a reaction, which I'm not quite sure what his concern was. But here we are. I just want to make sure for his benefit that this particular amendment notes that the meaning assigned by the definition of Aboriginal peoples in Canada is subsection 35(2) of the Constitution Act 1982, and that piece of the Constitution, I have it right here. It says, in this act, Aboriginal peoples of Canada include Indian, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada. And I think I think my comments still stand that I made the other day, that is what this bill hopes to realize.
Mr. Viersen, one sec, please. Point
Sorry,
of order.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order. Could we welcome Monsieur Saint-Marie to the committee, please?
That's
He's just
not a point of order, and I will provide a
not.
proper welcome when the time comes.
My apologies.
Welcome, bienvenue.
On the same point, I'm here as
Mr.
well.
Melillo, I'd like to welcome you to the table. You've
Thank
now
you.
subbed in, and it's always good to see you here. Mr. Viersen, please carry on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I, too, would like to welcome Mr. Saint-Marie. Not the member from Gabriel Saint-Marie, but yeah, I one time made that mistake, Mr. Chair. I called him the member from. So nonetheless, I think this amendment does justice. I think there was a similar amendment that did not have that piece in there, and I think that's important to note that what we are dealing with is a piece of legislation that is directly connected to the Constitution of Canada and ensuring that we can bring realization to Section 35. I remember when I was first elected, I didn't realize that Section 35 existed because I just seen the paper that you get handed out at school and things like that around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and this is on the next page. And so kind of like the first page of Google, nobody reads past the first page of Google. That's what happens with the Charter. I remember in school we read the Charter often, but I didn't realize when I got here, I didn't realize there was a page 2. And so a part 2 that starts with Section 35. And that was a complaint that I remember that when I first got on this committee, that was a complaint that many people that came to this committee pointed out. They said that Section 35 rights need to be recognized. And I remember the chief of the Assembly of First Nations coming here, and the term, I'll never forget it. He just said, was that an empty box or a full box? And so I guess that is what we're here dealing with today, is to try to establish what is in that box and what is not in that box. And so here we are, making this amendment to the bill to ensure that Parliament will fulfill its duties under Section 35 of the Constitution. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll now put the question, shall CPC 2 carry? Recorded vote? Are you, okay, recorded vote.
Mr. Batiste?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Enthusiastically, yes.
Ms. Gainey? Mr. McLeod? Yes. Ms. Atwin? Yes. Yes. Mr. Schmale?
Yes. With enthusiasm.
Mr. Melillo?
I am in favor.
Mr. Viersen?
I'm in favor.
Mr. Zimmer?
In favor.
Mr. St. Marie? Ms. Idlout?
Ang po nga in favor. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So, unanimous.
Okay, that clause carries. And as I noted, and we will not be dealing with NDP 3 because they were identical. And as we learned previously through the intervention I was going to make but was late getting to, that when a CPC, when a new amendment is carried and it's part of a new clause, that clause carries without a vote. Okay. So we now move to Clause 5, and under Clause 5 we have CPC 2.1. Would the member like to move CPC 2.1? And this was put forward by Mr. Viersen.
Yes. I would like to move this one.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to provide a ruling from the chair, so I'll ask for your indulgence as we go through this. Clause 5 of Bill C-53 provides that treaties entered into by a Métis government and His Majesty in right of Canada may be brought into force on a day fixed by the Governor and Council, once the Governor and Council is satisfied that the conditions for the coming into force of a treaty by the Métis government and the Government of Canada have been met. The amendment proposes that both Houses of Parliament must affirm, by resolution, that the requirements for the coming into force of a treaty have been met before the Governor and Council can fix the date on which a treaty can come into force and add the necessary information to the schedule. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. In the opinion of the chair, subjecting the coming into force of a treaty to the affirmation by resolution of both Houses of Parliament is a new concept that goes beyond the scope of the bill as adopted by the House at second reading. Therefore, I rule this amendment inadmissible.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to challenge that ruling.
Okay, thank you. So we will vote on sustaining or not the ruling of the chair. So for those who are new to the table, a sustain will confirm that this is an inadmissible amendment, and a not sustain means that it would be admissible, or that the ruling of the chair is incorrect. So,
Mr. Chair, can you confirm what the question is?
That the ruling of the chair be sustained.
Okay.
Mr. Batiste?
Sustained. We agree with the chair.
Ms. Atwin? Sustained. Mr. Carr? Ms. Gainey?
Sustained.
Mr. McLeod?
Sustained.
Mr. Schmale?
Against.
Mr. Melillo?
Against.
Mr. Viersen?
Against.
Mr. Zimmer?
Against.
Monsieur St. Marie? Ms. Idlout?
Sustain.
7 yeas and 4 nays.
Okay, so the ruling of the chair is sustained. We will then move on to CPC 3. Would CPC 3, Mr. Schmale, would you like to move that?
I would like to move that. I'll quickly speak to it. I do believe there is somewhat agreement around the table. All right, perfect. So I'll just do just basically read it and then let you know. So basically, again, addressing concerns that we did hear earlier, allowing parliaments a little more oversight, and addressing the concerns we heard, because I'll just quickly do this here. I know there's support around the table, so very quickly. It was some of the quotes I just want to quickly get in the record here. It was from Interim Chief, National Chief, Joanna Bernard of the Assembly of First Nations, basically saying that the consultation with First Nations was not done appropriately. We heard that in testimony. So this is kind of where this stemmed from, giving more clarity and more oversight within the parliamentary process. And if there are anyone voting against, I'm happy to ask any more questions, but I will leave it there for now.
Mr. Viersen?
Before I move to Mr. Viersen as the next one, I just want to inform our members that if CPC 3 is adopted, NDP 4 cannot be moved due to a line conflict. So just keep that in mind as we make our decision on this one. And Mr. Viersen, you're next on my list for CPC 3.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just a little disappointed that I didn't get to discuss my last amendment, which, like, this one is a reasonable step below. Again, the supremacy of Parliament is something that I think is important to protect, and so this bill would ensure that Parliament would at least see the treaty before having it come into force. That would give Parliament opportunity at least to have a response, be able to move motions in order to scrutinize, call the minister to give testimony around it, that sort of speak before it comes into force.
Mr. Viersen, I'd just ask you to speak to CPC 3.
Yeah.
We already dealt with the and dispensed with 2.1, so we're not going to have debate on that. But yeah, if you'd like to speak to the motion or the amendment before us, that would be.
Yeah, no, that's what I am speaking to. I just voiced my disappointment with the other one, but this amendment would make it so that the treaty would not come into force earlier than 30 sitting days after it's been tabled. So we had the motion that I convinced my colleagues to support earlier passed, which would say that it has to be tabled. Now we're asking for, my first amendment was to say, hey, Parliament should approve it all. That was deemed inadmissible. So here we are with this one, which I think is a reasonable, not as good as the first one, but a reasonable to protect the supremacy of Parliament and to ensure that we can actually have a debate around it. Is have no earlier than 30 sitting days. So have 30 sitting days between the tabling and the coming into force of a particular treaty. And so I'm excited to have this one go forward. Having Parliament to have the ability to see, debate, question the minister, bring in witnesses if they need to have, because the previous amendment that we passed, I would point out, had the whole that after tabled, the treaty is to refer to it.
Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the enthusiasm from my colleagues on the other side, but I would just ask if the room could contain their excitement just a little bit so that we can hear the gentleman who has the floor, Mr. Viersen. Thank
Fair
you.
enough. I would ask all members to maintain
And I can barely hear him.
decorum within our proceedings. This is very important and serious legislation, one that the founders of this country did not finish, and this is a very important piece of legislation that will get to that work that was not done. So I'll ask Mr. Viersen to continue with his intervention, and I'll encourage others to listen, and we'll get through this.
Listen, Mr. Kerr. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that intervention, and my colleague for making that point of order. This amendment would allow for that committee that we referenced in the previous amendment that we passed to do its work. it would be a no earlier than 30 days. And we've seen over and over again from this Liberal government that they like to ram things through. They like to move closure motions and programming motions to make sure that they can, without any hours of debate, they can just push things through. And so this, out of an abundance of caution and out of the desire for Parliament to be able to operate, that's why we put forward motions like this, so that Parliament can see the document, can question witnesses, can have affected communities show up to inspect the bill. So that is the desire of this amendment. So I'm certain that the Liberal colleagues will have no objection to that. So we will. I cede the floor at this point.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Malillo next to my speaker list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I promise to be brief to my colleagues across the way, although they were cheering and encouraging me to speak earlier. So I'm okay. I appreciate that.
Really good motion.
So just, I don't want to echo what has already been said, Mr. Chair, of course, but I do agree that this is very important for increased transparency. I say that as someone representing much of the Métis homeland, as well as 42 First Nations. So of course there's definitely a lot at stake in my riding when it comes to this. But Mr. Chair, you mentioned the line conflict, rightfully so, and looking at the proposals we have versus what's been brought forward by the NDP, 30 days versus 21 days. I'm just curious. I don't want to put my friend on the spot. I don't know if she's at the table right now, but I'm curious to know from the NDP what their position would be on this due to the line conflict, and why they had moved forward with 21 days versus 30 days. If we're able to get an answer on that, I'd be curious to know. Thank you.
Yeah, the member did speak to that earlier and had indicated that she would support the CPC versus NDP motion. So that is the challenge we get when we have people coming and going. We lose some of the continuity of conversation. Next, I have Mr. Viersen on my list.
I guess I just wanted to ask the officials that if they have any idea why this wasn't included in the original draft of the bill, a reference to Parliament, sort of thing.
Well, no, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it like that. Sorry. No, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. This came out wrong. There's a better way to say that.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Ms. Redmond?
I will say that a tabling provision like this for a treaty is not necessarily standard in treaty implementing bills. Obviously, this bill has some novel features. The treaties that it contemplates haven't yet been negotiated, so that is a bit unusual, but it's because it's not a standard part of this kind of bill, most likely that it wouldn't have been included in the first place.
What's another example of a treaty implementation bill that I would have, like in the last 8 years, would have dealt with?
This committee would have seen the implementation statute for the Whitecap Dakota Treaty earlier this year in June. So that was an implementing bill for a treaty.
Okay, and prior to that, do you know?
I'm not sure what the most recent one before that would be, but there are certainly many examples over the last several years, all dating back as far as the 1970s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was on this committee for 6 years, and I don't remember a treaty implementation bill, but I was gone for 2. Mr. Renner?
The last one that would have been approved was more than 10 years ago.
Okay. So that I was, because I'm. It is kind of an interesting thing that I was on here for 6 years and we never had.
I believe, and I stand to be corrected by the committee, that Whitecap may not have been, the Whitecap implementing legislation may not have been referred to the committee. It was passed quite quickly.
Okay.
It was referred to committee?
Yeah,
Okay.
I wasn't here for the last 2 years, so that prior to that. Okay.
The old chair got it done in one day.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge.
Just saying. Just saying.
It is a. I guess the 21 days is an interesting is there any, like 30 days, I guess 30 days is kind of a like standard month, and I think that's what we were thinking about, but that's not a, sitting days is not. Is there any reason why we would choose 21 days versus 30 days?
From a legal standpoint on
Yeah.
this, I think the difference is well understood, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just trying to think of is there like a, what other things are over there that are like delayed for 21 days that, so I'm not sure. Because if ours doesn't pass, then where does, like, why is the other one at 21 days, I guess? But that's not your question to answer. All right, that's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Viersen. Members, shall CPC 3 carry? Recorded vote? Okay. Recorded vote, please.
Mr. Batiste?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Oui.
Ms. Gainey? Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Ms. Atwin?
Yes.
Mr. Schmale?
Only because of Mr. Viersen, but I vote yes now.
Mr. Melillo?
Actually, a good question.
I vote in favor.
Mr. Viersen?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer?
Yes.
Madame Gill?
Oui.
Ms. Idlout?
Ang po nga, yes.
11 yeas.
Well done, members. We're going to move on. Next, we have Clause 5 and 6 with no amendments on either.
Clause 5 is amended.
What's that?
Clause 5 is amended.
We need to look at Clause 5 as amended, so all in favor of, or we'll call the vote on Clause 5 as amended. Do you want a recorded vote?
Yes.
Okay, recorded vote, please.
Mr. Batiste?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Ms. Gainey?
Yes.
Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Ms. Atwin?
Yes.
Mr. Schmale? Mr. Melillo?
Yes.
Mr. Viersen?
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer?
Yes.
Madame Gill?
Oui.
Ms. Idlout?
Ang po nga, yes.
11 yeas.
Okay, thank you, members. Next, shall Clause 6 carry? Mr. Viersen, I've called the vote. So we'll do Clause 6. There's no amendments to it, and
Hopefully we can have a discussion about Clause 6.
I've called the vote on it.
Well,
We'll call Clause 6.
like, you can't just call the vote. You have to, it doesn't have to be moved.
Yes, you can, and you're the chair.
Yeah.
Yes, I can, and I'm the chair. So there'll be lots of time yet. We have lots of other amendments to get to, and I have said Clause 6 carry. So we're going to have the vote, and there'll be, like I say, lots of time to discussion. So recorded vote, please.
Mr. Batiste?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Ms. Gainey?
Yes.
Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Ms. Atwin?
Yes.
Mr. Schmale?
Yes.
Mr. Melillo?
Yes.
Mr. Viersen?
No.
Mr. Zimmer?
Yes.
Madame Gill?
Oui. It's just a clause.
Ms. Idlout?
Yes.
10 yeas, 1 nay.
Okay, thank you. We're now on to Clause 7, and we do have an amendment here. First up is CPC 3.1, put forward by Mr. Viersen. Mr. Viersen, would you like to move Clause 3.1?
No, it's Clause 6. 3.1.
Yeah, so we're on Clause 7 now,
7.
and you have an amendment, CPC 3.1.
Yes, here we go. Again, I would like to move this, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. And I'd like the floor. Yeah. 3.1 is the, so 3.1 it would delete lines 3 to 7 on page 4. This again goes to the in event of any inconsistency or conflict between a treaty and provision of this act, that the treaty prevails. I would just say that I think we should have that again. I go to the supremacy of Parliament. I think that I'm not exactly sure what this all entails, but I'm concerned around the conflict. So I'm going to just ask our officials to explain. I'm concerned about this piece, and so I put this amendment forward to try. Is this a normal thing that the treaties prevail? It seems to demote an act of Parliament in terms of a treaty. So it says, okay, if we're going to have two pieces of, like, if we're going to have a piece of legislation and it comes into conflict with the treaty prevails. Can you explain why this is needed? Is this a normal thing in these kinds of pieces of legislation, and does that? Why is this needed?
It is a very normal provision. In fact, it's in every version of an implementing statute for a treaty that we have on the books. And it essentially is a reflection of the fact that a treaty in this situation is protected by the Constitution. So occasionally there are situations where there can be interpretation challenges, this situation of an inconsistency or conflict that it describes. And so including a provision like this to account for that unlikely but still possibility of an inconsistency or conflict is very standard and helpful in terms of ensuring that the treaties and the act can be interpreted properly.
So if it's constitutionally protected, why is this necessary, I guess, is the question. Is that just are we just duplicating it, or for clarity?
Are you asking specifically about this clause or the bill?
Well, you mentioned earlier that treaties are constitutionally protected documents. So there's kind of presumption that this would be the case. So that,
This gives added clarity.
Okay. Is there a situation that you can point to where conflict between if this has been in a number of treaty implementation acts, has this ever been pointed to or used in any situation?
I don't have any examples to give you on that right now, and if it's an issue, we can try and provide more information later, but I can tell you that this is a very standard provision, and it appears in all implementing statutes.
Mm-hmm. But it's not, we don't know if it's ever been used before, so to speak. Is that anyone else?
I don't think we have anything further to add.
Okay. Right. So I guess go back to this, Mr. Chair, just that I think we should delete this out of the bill because it's kind of redundant in the fact that there are treaties come with constitutional backing. I think that's important. And also I think that I like to have Parliament being supreme in this country and ensuring that we don't tip the scales. If there is a conflict, there are mechanisms for conflict resolution in this country that have been used and continue to be used, and many times these are somewhat there are political solutions to these as well, and to outsource our job as parliamentarians who have to make decisions on things to a treaty when there's a conflict. I think we need to ensure that we can have that. So I would say that we should pass this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Schmale, you're next on my list.
Okay, we are currently short a member here. Has it, through you, Chair, to the officials, so just so I'm clear here, so if there are two treaties, say a First Nation and a Métis, and they come into conflict, what happens at that point, and would court action need to be required to set that out, or is that then an act of Parliament to figure out, or would the court say it's Parliament's job?
Not actually covered by this provision. Treaty, when used in this provision here, is treaty in the meaning as it's defined in the bill. So a treaty between Canada and one of the Métis governments listed in the schedule, or Métis collectivities listed in the schedule of this bill. So this doesn't address that scenario of a potential conflict between different treaties. It's just the bill is silent on that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. There's our member there. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this chair, and I appreciate your leniency as we wait for.
No, all good. Mr. Viersen does have his name on the list, so we can go back to Mr. Viersen.
I guess if we could get a little bit of clarity around, is there a mechanism, is there a mechanism around concerns about treaty conflict? Is there a mechanism anywhere for that?
I mean, negotiation is one possible way. Treaties themselves could contain provisions that could account for that, but again, that's outside the scope of this bill. We're not talking about conflicts between different treaties. This provision concerns specifically the relationship between these treaties addressed by this bill and the Act itself.
All right. Thank you.
We're now going to vote on CPC 3.1, so we'll have a recorded vote on this.
No. Mr. Batiste?
Against.
Mr. Carr?
Against.
Ms. Gainey?
Against.
Mr. McLeod?
Against.
Ms. Atwin? Against. Mr. Schmale?
I'm going to vote in favor.
I'm sorry?
In favor.
Okay. Mr. Melillo?
In favor.
Mr. Viersen?
In favor.
Mr. Zimmer?
In favor.
Madame Gill?
Contre.
Ms. Idlout?
Against.
7 nays, 4 yeas.
Okay, so CPC 3.1 does not carry. We have next NDP 4.02. I'll ask if the member would like to move NDP 4.02.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to adopt NDP Amendment 4.02.
Sid Lute. I do have some thoughts on this that I would like to share. So, subclause, this is a ruling from the chair. So, subclause 7.1 of the bill provides that there are inconsistencies or conflicts between a treaty and an act of parliament. The provisions of the treaty will prevail insofar as those inconsistencies or conflicts. The amendment adds that in the event of inconsistencies or conflicts between an Indigenous right or title, the right or title will also prevail. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition states on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. In the opinion of the chair, the aforementioned element is a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill. Therefore, I rule this amendment as inadmissible. Okay. So, shall clause 7 carry? Recorded vote? I already called clause 7. So we're.
So he's.
You're calling clause 7? Okay. So we'll challenge the chair. So we'll see if I'm calling the vote on clause 7. So to sustain the chair will be that we will vote on clause 7, and to not sustain the chair means we won't vote on clause 7.
Okay. You're going back to debate.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Batiste?
Sustained.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Carr?
Sustained.
Ms. Gainey?
Sustained.
Mr. McLeod?
Sustained.
Madame Atwin?
Sustained.
Mr. Schmale?
Against.
Mr. Melillo?
I'm sorry.
With great respect to the chair, against.
Mr. Viersen?
Against.
Mr. Zimmer?
Against.
Madame Gill?
Pour.
Ms. Idlout?
Against.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
So we will then call clause 7 carry. So.
No, you call clause 7.
Oh, yeah, shall clause.
No,
Yeah, shall clause 7 carry.
That's the question.
Yeah. And we'll have a recorded vote. I've called the vote, so we're going to do the vote, and then you can do the point of order. So recorded vote, please.
Mr. Batiste.
Just, what are we voting on?
Clause 7.
Okay. In favor.
Mr. Carr.
En faveur.
Ms. Gainey.
In favor.
Mr. McLeod. Ms. Atwin.
In favor.
Mr. Schmale.
In favor.
Mr. Melillo.
In favor.
Mr. Viersen.
In favor.
Mr. Zimmer.
In favor.
Madame Gill.
I'm really having a lot of trouble. Can you hear me? Yes? I'm having trouble with my connection. Yes, I vote in favor.
Ms. Idlout.
How did they vote? Oh, okay, in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Edley.
11 yeas.
Okay, before we move to Clause 8, Mr. Viersen had a point of order. I'll now go to that.
All right, Mr. Chair, I don't have it in front of me, but I am pretty sure that when a clause is moved, there is a time for a debate, or like a time for discussion, at least to ask questions to the officials on a particular clause.
That's not a point of order, but I will explain.
No,
that's
precisely a point of order.
The question, let me respond. The way I work at it is that I'll call a clause, and if I see hands, then I'll create a speaking list. In the absence of any hands, I don't have a speaking list. We move into the vote.
Okay, well,
and so that's what I'm watching for.
What I don't have clear, and this is the point of order. What I don't have clear, Mr. Chair, is there does not seem to be an opportunity between the movement of a clause, which I understand is kind of an automatic thing. Like, how do I know when the clause is being moved and the question is being called? Because you are simultaneously moving and calling the question, and there is no opportunity for me. Suddenly we're on Clause 7, and you're calling the question, and I say, what do you mean suddenly? No. We were suddenly, I was dealing with Ms. Idlout's amendment, right? And I was going to challenge the chair on Ms. Idlout's amendment. And before I knew it, we were on to voting for the Clause 7, which if you want to play that, if that's how we're going to do this, I will adjust my actions accordingly. But there ought to be an ability for me to say, no, I would like some clarification on Clause 7 around this particular thing, between the movement of Clause 7 and the vote on Clause 7, right? That regardless of whether I have an amendment on it. There are several things that I don't have amendments on this bill, but I was looking forward to having the officials here so that I could say, hey, what does this mean? I know for a fact that when we get to the last few pages of this bill, we had no witnesses that addressed any of the things on the last 2 pages of the bill, and so I'm looking forward to asking them about those things. So how am I going to do this, Mr. Chair?
Let me respond to that. Everybody's working from the same roadmap as I am, which is the agenda that was distributed to all members, and this clearly lays out the order that we're going through things. And so as we go through it, I'm a bit behind right now, but I'm ticking off what we're doing. But if you also mark off where we're at, you'll know what's coming next. And so what I'm looking for as I introduce the item is any indication of people wanting to speak. And if I don't see any, then I move right on to the order of business, which is the vote. And so I would simply say, if you want to speak, as you know, you'll see what's coming up next. If you want to speak to it, get my attention. We'll get you on the list. I have 2 clerks here helping me out, and to watch to make sure that we're covering online and in the room. And if we see a hand up, then the floor you'll be put on a list and you'll be recognized. So that is how we're working through this. And if there's any confusion, I apologize for that. But that is the process to try to move us through clause by clause. Okay.
Not happy about
Can I just quickly speak to that point of order, Chair?
Yes.
I think, I think and it happened to me earlier too, as well. There wasn't that little gaps. Like, I'm not saying we're going to speak to everything here. Like, we want this to move along, and hopefully wrap up. But at the same time, as Mr. Viersen is saying, it's immediate. There is no little, when you say you look around the room for people to talk or ask, there's no opportunity. There's no ask of the questions. Does anyone want to talk? It's bang and then vote. Call the clause, vote. And I think that's what just Arnold's saying.
Okay, so I would say that if you look at what's next, we're on clause 8, and so we have 2 amendments here, and then shall clause 8 carry. So that'll be the order we go through it. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is calling CPC 3.2. When there is an amendment, I'll be asking for the member to move it, and that's a good time for others who want to get on the speaking list to raise their hand. If there's not, if it's a clause, let me find one, such as we just went through, where there's no amendments, take clause 16. When we get to clause 16, if I don't have anybody as we move into that, I will simply say, will clause 16 carry? So
And you could even group those clauses together.
I would just point out, in the last one, I was attempting to challenge the chair on Ms. Idloud's, the ruling that you made on Ms. Idloud's her amendment. I was attempting to do that. I said challenge the chair. By the time I said that, right? I don't think I was like out of order on that. I think by the time I said that, you had already moved clause 7, and then I was said. Then it was pointed out to me that we had moved on to clause 7, and so I said, well, challenge the chair anyways. But that was not my intention. My intention was not to challenge the chair on clause 7. My intention was to challenge the chair on Ms. Idloud's amendment so that we could have a discussion. Because I would actually like to hear from her what the logic is on her amendment. But
point of order, Mr. Chair.
I would say that in that case it was ruled out of order.
Point of order.
Admissible. I gave the explanation for it.
Yes,
I'm just going to go to the point of order, and
I
then we'll come
challenge
back.
the chair on
I'll
that,
come back to you,
not
Mr.
on
Viersen.
this.
Just give me a second to go, Mr. Schmale.
Repetition, it's in relevance. We've heard this and you've ruled on it. Seems to be repetition in my mind.
I will say, Mr. Viersen, I hear your concerns that have been raised, and so I will endeavor to make sure that people know where we're at and that there's an opportunity. We want to have good discussion, good input by members. I also have an interest in moving this legislation forward, the review of it through, as
Mr. Chair,
we've been asked by the three nations, and but we also want to have due process. So, your point of order,
Mr. Chair, it is not your job. It is not your job unless you don't like to be a chair, and if you want to sit on that side, then it's your job to move to push legislation through. It's the government's job to do that. But when you sit in the chair, you're an official of Parliament, and it's not your job to push legislation through. It's not. You said that. It is not your job. It is your job.
It's to facilitate.
It is your job to be the chair for this committee. You are the chair for all of us. You are to operate the meeting.
I am well aware of the role of the chair. Yes, thanks.
Mr. Chair.
But you just said that you are trying to push this legislation through.
We've had legislation
that is
being
not your
referred
job.
to us.
That is not your job, Mr. Chair. Your job is to facilitate
to
the
get
meeting.
the job done, to make sure.
Interpreters can't keep up if two people are
Yeah.
talking.
So I'm just going to interrupt for the point. I have a point of order. Then we'll come back to you.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that with the presence of clerks that a lecture to you on your role is necessary. So I'm just wondering if perhaps at this point in time, calling a point of order to the demeanor in which this is being addressed can be heard, and I understand
Point of order,
the
Mr. Chair.
perspective, and then we can move on.
Mr. Zimmer, and then we'll come back to
Yeah,
Mr. Viersen.
and the member hasn't been in the House that long, but I will say I've been a former chair, and what Mr. Viersen is saying, it's an accurate challenge. It's not the job of the chair to pick one side of the argument or the other. It's to facilitate the discussion. So to say now, to get things moving and say sorry about the point of order, it's a very legitimate point of order, and it needs to be addressed by the chair.
Yeah, Mr. Viersen, are you done? I hear your points, and we'll continue to move through the review
Mr.
of
Chair,
this
just
legislation.
with your indulgence, to go back to the one that you deemed out of order, Ms. Idloud's amendment, if I could, Could you give her the floor and at least hear the logic that she was putting forward with that amendment?
I would say if Ms. Idlut wants to raise her hand and ask for that, that's her right. It was her amendment. And but at this point, we have moved beyond that. We're now on Clause 8 on CPC 3.2, which is your amendment, and I'm willing to go to that point and have a nice
Mr. Chair, just
smooth.
draw your attention to the fact the bells are now ringing, I believe.
Oh, okay, I just started. So with that, colleagues, it looks like, we are at the bells period, and we can request unanimous consent to continue.
No, I don't
okay,
get
there's a no.
unanimous
So with that,
Yeah.
we're out of time. So thank you, colleagues. We will resume on Tuesday. Meeting adjourned.